All right. Well, thank you for joining us today on this fine summer day that's very hot for all of us, I'm sure. Um, Hopefully you're ensconced in somewhere that's nice and air conditioned. Just for a quick review, my name is Lee Richard. I'm the International Training Coordinator over at the Queen's University International Center, and we're joined today by
My name is Jason Summers. I am one of the residence outreach counselors in housing and ancillary.
Jason. I just have a quick question for you. What do the residence counselors do exactly?
Good question. So through the year, we see students we provide one-on-one counseling for students who are living in residence.
Okay.
But the other part of our job is we run different trainings or different workshops tied to mental health. So an example of that being the presentation we're going to give today.
Yeah. So students in residence can come and basically talk to you just about anything?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Stresses, or, especially for international students, the kind of stresses that can come with being an international student, or just relationships or anything. I welcome people to call it student wellness services, and they can request an appointment with myself.
Cool. Awesome. So today we're bringing you kind of like the second part of a two-part series. Today, what we're delivering to you is called Building My Resilience Plan. So I guess in the first session, we kind of gave you some tips and pointers and kind of outlined, what a resilient kind of mindset kind of looks like. What are the certain qualities that help you to be more resilient in the face of stress in your life? For today's session, we're more going to focus on, well, what can you do? What are steps you can take to build that resilience plan to face stress in action?
Mm-hmm. We really want to focus on kind of the practical part. Sorry, I interrupted you, Lee.
No, it's all, no, whatever. Do your thing, Jason. But just for a quick overview, we're just going to kind of do a quick review. Well, what exactly is resilience? Well, for the sake of today's presentation, kind of like the working definition of resilience we're going to use is the ability to cope or manage high levels of stress, high levels of ongoing stress, and the ability to kind of recover from setbacks. But also kind of tied to that, also the ability to kind of recover from misfortune and change. Lots of change. There's never a lack of change in our lives. Anything you want to add to that, Jason?
No, I think that's great.
Cool. So I guess the first question we'll kind of tackle, well, why is resilience important?
And we touched a little bit about this in our first session, but we want to re-highlight that resiliency is important because it can be really helpful for maintaining mental health. It can help us avoid burnout. And what we mean by burnout are those times when I feel like I'm being asked to do more than I'm capable to do, and it kind of leads me to feeling fatigued or tired, or kind of increases that stress. Resiliency can also, or skills around resiliency can help us feel more successful, or help us appreciate those kind of successes that we have in our academic life. And it helps us process the stress of everyday life as an international student.
For sure. I mean, academic life can be stressful enough as it is, but if you add to that kind of like the experience of adjusting to a new culture, to a new community, trying to build and incorporate kind of time management skills, handling your courses, keeping up with assignments. But not only that, if you're new to Queens and Kingston, trying to find a new social group, and also on top of that, being away from maybe your familiar circles of social support, maybe such as your family and friends in your home community. All that can kind of really add and compound the stress that you already have as a university student in general.
Agreed.
So, what are some of the ingredients for a resilient mindset?
So some of the ingredients that we have here are this idea of self-reflection. So being able to check in with how I'm feeling or how I'm doing. Something I didn't touch on in the definition of resilience, but I think is important, is that resilience is a skill that we often don't recognize that we're using as we're using it. It's something that after we do something really tough, we can be like, I was really resilient in that moment. But because of how stressful these situations are, we often don't recognize in the exact moment that we're using those skills of resiliency. However, if we're able to do a little bit of that self-reflection, it can help with that. It's also trusting in ourselves. We're going to talk about kind of our strengths and leaning to what's worked in the past a little bit later on in the presentation, but it's a big part is recognizing that I do have the skills to do this, creating meaning, remembering why things are important for us, paying attention to our emotions, probably bias as a counselor or a mental health counselor. But I do think that aspect of paying attention to what emotions are coming up for me can be really important for helping me plan and work through a stressful situation. And then a big part of this presentation is going to be, how can we develop these problem-solving skills?
For sure. No, I really like the emphasis on self-reflection, Jason. I mean, yeah, without that self-reflection, you have to take out that time just so you can pay attention, well, as you were talking about, like paying attention to your emotions, realizing when your stress levels are rising, knowing and understanding, and having trust in yourself to know when it's appropriate to reach out and seek help. But also, and tied to that, as you mentioned, also, yeah, reflecting on your past successes, not being overwhelmed by maybe some of the setbacks you're having, but being able to really celebrate the successes that you've had in the past and overcoming stresses and challenges as well. No, I really like that. Let's see here. So when you're overwhelmed, I mean, there's a lot of kind of different components that kind of can that kind of add to that kind of experience, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think, go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Jason.
I interrupted you. You go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, well, yeah, when you're overwhelmed, I mean, it's important to remember that to try and work through your problems at first, even though the process of working through your stress can seem overwhelming at first. It's important to remember that practice does make perfect. Even if you don't get it right the first time, or if you're not successful maybe in navigating the stresses or troubles that you're having, to not be too overwhelmed by that fact and still have trust in yourself that you are capable of overcoming the problems you may have in your life. It does take practice, and the more times you try, the better at it you'll become. It's important to remember to still maintain that trust in yourself, no matter how stressful it does get, to not give up on trying to work through that stress to begin with. But tied to that, though, part of that, I mean, it's important to remember that you're not alone ultimately when it comes to working through your stress. There are resources on campus that are available to you, and we're going to, and part of the focus of today's session as well will be to remind you of some of what those resources are on campus. Sorry, Jason, was there anything you want to add to that?
No, that's perfect.
Awesome. So I guess we'll get right into it and kind of look at, well, what are kind of some of the steps we can take for creating a resilience plan?
Yeah, so tied to these problem-solving skills, how can I build a bit of a plan for myself to use my skills or develop my skills of resilience? So we're in a really stressful situation, and we want to think about how we can work through it. So we've laid out a little bit of a plan here. Something we wanted to highlight is we've put them in order because that's really it is helpful for a presentation and it looks nice in a presentation, but you certainly don't need to follow through all these steps in the order provided.
Good point.
To still kind of use these skills. But how we're going to talk about it today is our first step is going to be checking in, how am I feeling? So what emotions are coming up for me in this moment? Our second step is thinking through what is my first thought of what to do. And that is kind of tied to our third step of what do I already know? How have I been successful in semi-similar situations in the past? Then we're going to look into what our potential resources are or who can help us in this moment. And finally, we're going to look into creating and maybe even writing down a tangible first step.
Should we start with the first step at the beginning, Jason?
I think we would like to start with the first step at the beginning.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, trying to find that first step at the beginning when we're overwhelmed, it doesn't work for me. I don't know about you.
Doesn't work for me.
It doesn't work for you. My emotions normally get in the way of that, or everything seems too overwhelming. It can't happen.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting, kind of like a sidetrack. I've been doing a lot of reading recently about how difficult it can be just to take that first step to action and how intimidating it is for many people in many situations. So yeah, it's not uncommon. So I get it. I can see why you put kind of, even as you emphasize that this isn't kind of a linear process that you listed here, you can kind of see the method to your madness and putting what is my first step kind of towards the end, because that ultimately can be the most intimidating part of it sometimes. No, cool. Well, I guess, even though, as you mentioned, it isn't really these steps really aren't in a linear way, and you can kind of start at any particular point where you're comfortable. I guess we will go through these steps in kind of a certain order. And I think the first part we'll kind of focus on is just, and this ties to the self-awareness piece we touched upon in the previous slide, but, really trying to develop that self-awareness and paying attention to our emotions, especially in the moment. When we feel that the stress starting to become overwhelming, when we kind of feel maybe that shortness of breath, maybe our thoughts start to become muddled, it's hard to kind of think rationally about a situation. It's important to pay attention to that, because our mind and our body are sending us in a kind of like an important signal that, hey, we're starting to become overwhelmed in this moment, and maybe it's time to start to put maybe an action plan in place, or maybe dig a little deeper to find out why we're experiencing this stress in kind of like a visceral and strong manner. So yeah, it's really important to kind of pay attention to your emotions. The reason why we've included many different emojis here, kind of a neat way to do it, especially, stress can be very an overwhelming experience. And if you're looking to have that check-in, an easy way to do it is kind of just take a quick, brief moment to kind of jot down kind of like a smiley of, kind of the emotion or feeling that you're having in this moment, right? I mean, when I usually, I kind of pick for myself often or not, is like the smiley face upside down, because I'm trying to stay positive, but generally I feel discombobulated or kind of disorganized in general. So yeah, that's a smiley I end up producing often when I'm checking in with myself. I don't know. But yeah, it's kind of a quick, kind of like tangible takeaway you can use when you're trying to do that process of just doing that quick check-in with yourself when you feel stress coming on. Anything you want to add to that, Jason?
I think you touched on it, but that idea that, sometimes this is a little bit more difficult than it seems.
Yeah. Trying
to figure out how I am feeling or having a name for what this emotion is.
Good point.
And I really love the idea of drawing it. There's also something I do on my own time, but also do within counseling, is I have like it's called an emotions wheel that you can Google, and it's like hundreds of emotions. And even just like being able to read through and be like, I do feel this one. I feel overwhelmed, or I feel resentful. It can be nice to have kind of the name for it.
Excellent. No, sounds like a really good resource. And you can just Google that, emotions wheel.
Yeah, if you do emotions wheel or feelings wheel, it'll be one of the first two that pops up there.
Cool. Okay. So next step in the kind of the process, or another step in the process, is trying to just figure out, articulate what is the first step of what to do, or what is the first thought of what to do. And this step, again, it's more of rather than trying to choose on your first kind of actionable step that you can take, it's rather just to make kind of like a laundry list or a brainstorm of all the different things you could do in that situation. don't leave out anything. Don't leave something out because maybe it seems silly or extraneous or stupid. Just add everything, just write everything down. It's kind of like that, tied into that self-awareness piece. You can find it can be very powerful just to write down everything physically on a piece of paper, to remind yourself of the list of all the many different options you can have, is a first step to kind of take on the stress that you're experiencing. It can include anything. I've made these lists before, and more often than not, at the top of my list, I write down sleep. I don't know, it seems like my default response to stress is that it makes me tired. So a lot of times sleep is on my list. Fair enough. Sometimes I write down, well, take a walk, eat a happy meal. Maybe eat, well, not from McDonald's, but I should say eat a healthy meal. Granted, healthy meals are good too. But just don't exclude anything. Include anything that could be included in that very first kind of step that you can take.
And I think something really tied to this is the idea that, oftentimes when people are really struggling with what is my first thing that I need to do to start a daunting task or feeling overwhelmed, we'll talk about it in counseling. And the first thing that people will say is like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to choose. I don't know what the options are. But as we begin to talk things through, people will make that kind of brainstorm or laundry list of things. And almost always the answer is in that list somewhere. It's just, how can we begin to put ourselves in a space where we feel comfortable choosing that that's the one I need right now? I remember back to my own undergrad, I ended up taking first year calculus a couple times. It was a struggle for me. And in that, the last time that I took it and I ended up passing the course, I was feeling an immense amount of stress around the first midterm because I was so scared of failing again and feeling the time crunch. I waited till the summer before my fourth year to do my first year calculus course. So I put a little bit of a time crunch on myself. And going into that first midterm, I kind of felt like what I really wanted to do was just like drop the course. I wanted this to be over. But as I took the time to kind of write out and think through all of my different options to think what is best for me kind of long term, I ended up making a different choice. But we'll talk about that a little bit further on in the presentation. Potentially the next slide, I can't remember.
We'll find out for sure right now. So
yes.
One thing to keep in mind, especially if you find maybe that you're having a bit of a mental block in writing down maybe what potential first steps could be, keep in mind, and this is part of the self-awareness too, but try to think back and remember, well, what's worked for you in the past when maybe you've been in a similar situation. If it's something specific to academics, maybe there's a particular office or resource that you accessed on campus that maybe was helpful. If it's overwhelming stress in general, maybe there's a specific personal contact or trusted member of your family that you turn to speak through to kind of talk about some of the problems you're having. But think back, the chances are there may be one or two times or a few times in your life where you've experienced stress or faced challenges and were able to work through it. Think back on what exactly those steps were and maybe who you turned to or what did you turn to in order to work through those stresses. This is a good way to kind of build confidence in yourself to take on your problems as well. It's a good way to kind of remind yourself that yes, you may have faced challenging situations in the past, but you were able to overcome those challenges as well. So it's a good way to kind of build up that confidence and remind yourself that you are capable of overcoming challenges that you might have. One way to kind of frame this around kind of the experiences of stress is revolving around, we'll say, social distancing in the light of COVID-19. Well, think about what you've done and all the progress you've made since social distancing has been in place. Maybe you've found new ways to mitigate stress. Maybe there's new hobbies that you've taken on or new skills that you've learned. Maybe you've been able to finish, finally been able to build that castle in Minecraft or something like that. Anything that you've kind of constructive action you've taken part, use that as a way to kind of remind and acknowledge yourself that you have made progress even during this stressful time as well, and use that confidence as kind of like a guiding, as a first step to propel yourself through working through any stresses you are having now. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Jason?
No, I think that's great. And I think it's important to, oftentimes we think when we're faced with a new type of stress, say quarantining or self-isolation or physical distancing,
Sure.
we feel like we need a completely new set of skills to cope with that. When in reality, it's often looking back to situations that kind of relate in the past and how can I adapt those skills, or how can I choose to kind of re-amalgamate those skills for this current situation.
Good point. No, it kind of reminds me of something. When I'd lived overseas for a while, and when I'd first moved, when it was to Japan, actually, when I first moved there, I felt it was really hard to kind of build up a social circle, and kind of make friends. And what I felt at the time is, what I kind of decided upon the course of action at the time is, well, maybe what I should do is maybe just follow what I'm interested in. So for me at that time, I'm really interested. I really like seeing live bands. I really enjoy live music. So I thought, okay, well, I enjoy doing this anyway. I'm going to look to try to make friends within maybe the groups of people that go to like to see concerts as well. So I dedicated time and energy to making sure, even if I felt kind of overwhelmed, that I would go out and kind of put myself out there and try to introduce myself to people at live music venues and such. And, it didn't happen automatically, but slowly but surely over time, I was able to kind of build a circle of friends that way. So now I kind of use the same approach. If I move someplace new, I kind of look towards building my social circles in areas where I have interests already, whether that's in, let's say, hiking or canoeing or going to see live music. I kind of look to build friends and relationships in those areas, and in what I enjoy doing already in my life. So it's kind of worked. Anyways, that was my 2 cents. On to the next slide. Another thing to keep in mind when moving to or when trying to kind of wrap your head around what could be some steps to help work through the stresses or challenges you're having is, well, try to remind yourself or educate yourself on what are some of the potential resources that you have right now in the moment. Sometimes it's easy to kind of lose sight of maybe some of these resources. For example, friends and family. Perhaps there's people in your social circle in your family who have maybe dealt with similar experiences in the past, and can provide you some direction on maybe how you can proceed, or what your first steps can be. Here on campus, well, for example, if you're an international student, for example, there's the international student advisors embedded within Quick that can give you direction about on what you can do or resources you can access. I know, well, as you were mentioning, Jason, definitely a lot of stress that can happen, especially around academic challenges, right? Well, there's SAS, or the Student Academic Success Services, their office is located, it escapes me right now. Stauffer, that's right, on the main floor of Stauffer. And yeah, all students are able to make appointments with them to kind of address specific challenges they may be having with their assignments. But also faculty-specific supports. For example, in the Faculty of Arts and Science, in the Faculty of Engineering. There's also counselors and advisors embedded within the faculties as well that can provide you some direction and support as well. Anything I may have missed, Jason?
I don't think you missed anything, but it draws me back to myself working through calculus, where I ended up going for help. I realized that when I'd struggled with how to study for midterms in my first year, I ended up utilizing the University of Toronto equivalent of Student Academic Success Services quite a bit. I came into my first year not knowing how to study because I was full of unearned confidence academically. So,
oh, geez.
But I quickly learned that I needed to learn those skills, and those people were able to help me a lot. And so I ended up revisiting the center in my third year to retap into how I can begin to learn and kind of tackle and create study plans for myself. I also ended up using kind of like a faculty support, but I ended up going to my TA quite a bit.
Okay.
So I ended up going to every office hour for that TA, always with the questions, whether he wanted it or not. But he was a very, very good teacher and teaching assistant.
Well, no, it helps to be consistent, right? Or diligent about accessing resources. Maybe one thing we didn't touch upon is for students for students who are undergoing psychological stress as well. Of course, there's student wellness services on campus as well. They have embedded counselors who it's very easy to make an appointment with. You just call them up and we'll provide some contact information towards the end. But yeah, you just get in contact with them and they're happy to set up an appointment with you with one of those counselors. As well, there's peer support groups embedded in campus as well. I know the AMS has a peer support group where it's dedicated peer counselors that are whose sole aim is to help students on campus kind of work through psychological stress they're having as well. And of course, residence counselors would be remiss if we didn't note that resource as well. And last but not least, residence dons as well. Could you provide any context for that, Jason?
Yeah, so within residence, we have student leaders for each floor in residence who are well-versed in, these are current students who have been through these types of stressors before, maybe not the exact same situation, but might be able to help in different situations or even normalize the stress. The other great part is these residence dons tend to know where if they aren't the best resource for you, they can guide you to the best resource. Now, I don't know how long this presentation will live on, but in the 2020-2021 year, if you are a first year student but not living in residence, you will also be tied to a peer mentor. And those peer mentors can do the same role and kind of also act as a resource for you as a first year student.
Oh, wow. They didn't have anything like that when I was going to university. Well, okay. And we'd be remiss, of course, there's always a lot of anxiety and stress that can be tied to finding a career path once we graduate. And the Career Services Office on campus at Queen's can definitely help you to find some direction with that as well. But I guess we'll end at the start, so to speak, and talk about or provide some context. Well, what could be some of the ways to kind of wrap our heads around what could be our first steps in creating a plan?
Yeah, so we have talked through all these things to check in on and all these ideas around self-reflection.
Sure.
But we've gotten to the point where I feel comfortable choosing what my first step should be. So what I should try to do first within kind of a timely manner. And this can be helpful in this space because we've hopefully brought down some of those overwhelming feelings. We're feeling a little bit more supported and we're ready to kind of decide where we want to go. For myself, in my academic stresses, I decided my first step was I was going to email the TA to find out when office hours were or to set up an appointment. The important thing to remember about a first step is there is no perfect first step. And that is not the goal of this at all. What we want to do is just choose an option that seems good for us and start there. Oftentimes what we'll find is that first step, whether it's something that gives us all the answers or gives us part of the answers, it will very easily lead to the second step and the third step and help us kind of guide towards working through this stressful time.
No, that's absolutely valid. I mean, I'll relay my own experience as well. I mean, when I first moved to Kingston as well, it was kind of like a psychologically and emotionally stressful time for me. And I kind of realized that I have to reach out and access some services. And yeah, my first step was just to kind of do some research online to see what resources were available through the campus and in the community in regards to counseling. Didn't necessarily, I didn't make, a concrete step there to seek counseling, but at first I wanted to just be clear on what resources were potentially available to me at that time. And that kind of helped it to kind of make the process a little less intimidating. Didn't have to make a decision at that point, but at least I wanted to be aware of what potential offices or resources or people I could reach out to.
Nice.
And I guess what we'll do is we'll try to kind of tie this all together here, and just kind of go through the different steps that are inherent within creating a resilience plan.
Yeah, again, so what we've talked about through this presentation are these kind of 5 steps that I can think about and try to maybe enact when I'm starting to feel really stressed and wanting to use my skill of resilience.
Yeah.
And those steps, again, are checking in with how I'm feeling, looking into what is my first thought of what to do and what are my first thoughts of what to do and making that brainstorm list. Reflecting on what do I already know? What are situations in the past where I've kind of done something like this before, and what things could work from that? Checking in with what my potential resources are, and then finally trying to come up with a tangible and maybe a timely first step to do.
Cool.
We just kind of wanted to end with that summary, but also some questions to consider for our plan.
Yep.
So maybe something for the participants to reflect on is, for a plan like this, when could you see yourself using it? Is it during midterms?
Yep.
Is it the first couple weeks of school? Is there an emotion or something that I do that I know happens when I'm feeling really stressed that I want to take note of? I know I can get kind of very closed off or very almost feeling cold when I'm stressed, and that's when I need to know to check in on how I'm doing. Another question is, how would I know to start it? Which I think I actually answered with that last part. Mm-hmm. And then finally, sometimes it's good to have someone to discuss these plans with if I wanted help with them. And who could that be for me? And to give an easy answer, I think it could be a counselor. It could be someone like myself if you want to make an appointment. This is certainly something that any counselor on campus would be happy to walk through with someone.
For sure. And yeah, Jason, I know you've included your kind of email address there. And I know if maybe participants or viewers reach out to you, if you don't have the answer, well, you definitely, how can I say, you may not have the answer, but you may be able to point people in the direction to someone who may have that answer. So
exactly.
No, I really like kind of like, yeah, the emphasis here, especially on just being on the mindfulness part of like paying attention and being in self-knowledge. Just reminding ourselves to check in with ourselves, especially when we start to feel overwhelmed. And granted, yeah, there's more opportunities than not these days to feel overwhelmed, that's for sure. As we promised, we'll just kind of as we wrap up, we'll just do a kind of a brief overview of some of the resources that are available on campus right now to you. As we mentioned, well, for international students, of course, there's at Quick, we have the International Student Advisors. And you'll notice throughout these resources lists, we'll offer some contact information. Again, if you'd like a copy of this slide deck to have for yourself, please feel free to contact Jason, who's included his email address here. Very professional, going back and forth. But for example, yeah, there's also Student Wellness Services. Easy to get in touch with them to make an appointment. You can call them directly Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. I think now they are still taking appointments in person from between 10 to 3, but I think there is someone to answer the phone between 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. I think if all same day appointments have been filled, then they'll start taking appointments at 8 a.m. the next day. Something that's brand new, the support group for racialized students. You can register through Student Wellness in their workshops page. If you click on that link, it'll give you kind of like an automated registration link that you can access to access one of those workshops. For kind of 24/7 resources that are available to students at Queen's. Well, there's the Empower Me line for crisis and mental support. We have their number listed here.
And I think another important part about the Empower Me line, from the international student perspective, is they have access to counselors in many different countries as well, and in many different languages, if there's a language you would prefer to do your counseling in.
Absolutely. No, thanks for emphasizing that, Jason. As well, there's also the Good to Talk line, which is available 24/7, who you can contact both through, I guess, calling and through text as well. As well, for a more local support, there's the KFLA crisis line that's available 24/7 to people in distress in the local Kingston area. As well, as we mentioned, there's peer supports available on campus, such as the AMS peer support. Human rights advisors that are available through the Human Rights Office. If you've experienced or experiencing racism on campus, please get in touch with them and they can provide you direction on what your next steps can be. Feel free to call them. They're also located, if you're in campus on person. I think they are kind of keeping limited in-person contact sessions as well, but they can be accessed through room B506 at the Mac Corey Hall, or Hell as we listed here. If you've experienced sexual violence or would like some direction on what to do, please contact Barbara Lotan. She's available Monday through Friday and she's situated within the Human Rights Office as well. And her number is 613-533-6330 or bjl7@queensu.ca. Also, there's also resources available through the Faith and Spiritual Life Office, which is located on the second floor of the new Mitchell Hall. And they can be contacted at 613-533-2186 or chaplain@queensu.ca. Well organized. But yeah, just to give you some context for the peer support, it's situated through AMS, and they provide confidential, non-judgmental support as well. And one thing we can't emphasize enough, for all these resources listed here, it is completely confidential. Any information that you share with them or through these contacts will not be shared with anyone else. So please bear that in mind. Completely confidential. One kind of last resource we'll list here is through the Quick Conversation Group Program. While maybe they do the conversation group does not provide support specific to psychological stress, they do provide a venue where you can kind of meet people on campus as well. If you're looking for kind of like a low stress kind of way to just get out there and meet people, especially if you're an English language learner, please feel free to interact with the Quick English Conversation Group Program. It is being offered online right now, and you can access that group through their weekly meetings through the link listed at the bottom. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact either Jason or I. My email address, while it's not listed here, it's fairly easy to remember. It's lr77@queensu.ca. So yeah, if you have questions after viewing this video, please feel free to contact either myself or Jason. I think with that, we'll thank you for joining us today. Any final words, Jason?
No, but thank you so much for your time, and look forward to one day seeing you on campus.
Absolutely. Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye, Jason.